Good morning to those in the west, and good afternoon for those in the east. We're happy to have you with us today. As I stated previously, I'm really excited for today. I'm Jade Pichette. I'm the Manager of Programs at Cabinetmaker Canada. You've probably seen my face before if you've been to our online events, or occasionally some of you have actually met in person as I travel around the country. We have a great program for you today on LGBTQ2+ inclusion in the skilled trades. As I noted previously, if you're having any audio issues, please do check right now, and feel free to contact the host directly instead of putting it in the main chat. We also have English and French captioning that is currently happening. So please feel free to make use of the links that are there. And if you're at any point you're having trouble hearing somebody, please feel free to check out the captioning, because that's what it's there for, is to make sure that everybody can access this event as much as possible. So who is Pride at Work Canada? Pride at Work Canada, through dialogue, education, and thought leadership, we empower employers to build workplaces that celebrate all employees regardless of gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation. We help create safer, more inclusive workplaces that realize the full potential of all employees and bring down barriers to employment. Our learning, networking, and community events happen across the country, celebrating and connecting the most inclusive Canadian employers. At this point, we're working with over 150 different organizations around the country, and we're grateful that all of you have been able to join us today. We're also very, very grateful for the support of this event with the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum. This is an event in partnership with them, and you'll get to meet their executive director later today during the panel. The Canadian Apprenticeship Forum is a nonprofit organization that connects Canada's apprenticeship community. Participants work collaboratively to support vibrant and innovative apprenticeship systems and policies with a view to developing a highly skilled, inclusive, and mobile skilled trades workforce. Employers, unions, equity-seeking groups, educational institutions, and jurisdictions support CAF operations through membership. We've been really grateful to start working with CAF collaboratively, because we think that LGBTQ2+ inclusion in the skilled trades is something that we have to work on together to make a better space for all skilled tradespeople. With any of our events, we do a land acknowledgement, even if we are virtual. So Pride at Work Canada works on the traditional territories of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. This includes Two-Spirit and LGBTQ Indigenous people. We recognize that there are multiple barriers that impact Two-Spirit and LGBTQ Indigenous people from accessing meaningful, affirming, and inclusive employment. In our work, we look to reduce those barriers and are open to feedback from Indigenous workers, employers, and job seekers in making that a reality. Our office is on the Dish with One Spoon territory, also known as Takaranto, which is traditionally home to the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of New Credit First Nation. Today, Toronto is home to Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and as somebody who is of mostly white settler descent, I am both grateful to be here, but also recognize that I am an uninvited visitor and that most of my ancestors were also uninvited visitors to this territory. We also, this is part of our Pride series, and we want to honor the roots of Pride. The roots of Pride come from resistance, police, governmental, and societal discrimination. And in this time of discussion of anti-Blackness and anti-Indigeneity in Canada, the US, and around the world, we must be aware of the fact that homophobia and transphobia are entirely linked to colonization violence. And we at Pride at Work Canada work to support in solidarity Indigenous and Black communities, and are always open to feedback from those communities. Let's keep this conversation going on anti-Blackness and anti-Indigeneity. It isn't 1 month or 1 moment, it's every day that we do our work. We also, for those of you in the skilled trades, you're probably familiar with safety moments. So we wanted to include a safety moment to this event. And one thing is that many of us are at our computers right now watching this event, and our posture has a big impact on our health and productivity. I know myself, I found myself, I was slumping right then. And so, take a moment to evaluate your posture. If you need to stand up or stretch or do whatever works for your body, take this moment to do that. It's also important to take short breaks each hour. And in honor of that, let's all take a moment to adjust our posture and take a deep breath. So we'll breathe in and out. So I hope you have a healthy and safety time watching our event today, and that you are in whatever position is the most ergonomic for you and your body, depending on your levels of ability, shape, body shape, and the like. In terms of today's agenda, we will be starting with the welcome that we've been doing, as well as remarks from Sharp Dopler and Julie Green. We'll then launch into the very exciting panel on LGBTQ2 plus inclusion in the skilled trades and close off with some resources for you going forward. We have this event closed captions by AI Media in both English and French, so please feel free to click the captioning link. And this event is being recorded, so if you have issues and have to drop off for whatever reason, please feel free to just watch the video afterwards. It will be accessible to you. For the panel, we won't be able to answer all the questions, but for others, please email info@prideatwork.ca. Keep the chat an inclusive and welcoming space. You already have. I've seen many lovely commentary in the chat so far of where people are coming from, and even somebody visiting or tuning in from Pakistan, which is really amazing. So please have a happy Pride, and we're glad that you're here. So to start off, we will be moving to our remarks. So I'm very proud to introduce Sharp Dopler, who's the sole proprietor at Sharp Solutions. Sharp is a non-binary two-spirit person of Sioux, Fox, Cherokee, and Irish ancestry. They live, work, and play in Ottawa, the unceded traditional territory of Anishinaabe people. Sharp is a carrier of ceremony and helper in Indigenous and other communities. He is an educator, advocate, and researcher who uses all pronouns in every context. She is a military veteran, martial artist, trained as a social service worker, and has been self-employed as a consultant since early 2016. They have presented on a variety of topics at local, national, and international venues for over 20 years, and I've been very grateful over those 20 years to be part of that and get to know Sharp when I was in Ottawa. So Sharp, welcome.
Ani bozo kwe se gos ganagoa Sharp Dopler and Dishnukas, Newfoundland and Dunjaba. Jijala gibeshkwaki ashkwaki minwa Irish. Anishnaabijan kausen nimiki makwa dodem. Ishkabewas mijo manatok. Okichita. Thanks for the great introduction, Jade. I appreciate it, and for your kind words. It's an honor to be asked to be here. It's a little odd, as I am someone who has never worked in the skilled trades. I have been a bit of an egghead most of my life. I have a couple of university degrees, etc. But there's a couple of things that I wanna say. I appreciate acknowledging all of the territories that people are sitting on. No matter where you are sitting on Indigenous territory, and that's a powerful thing to acknowledge for all of us. The other thing that I kind of want to start with is we are situated in a country that's known as Canada, the traditional territory of many First Nations and Inuit communities. And Pride is always an interesting place for me to be in because as an Indigenous person within the LGBTQ community, there isn't always space for us as Indigenous people. And sometimes it's challenging because we are often put in a position of having to choose between being Indigenous or being queer. And I use the term queer because it's just a little easier for me. I'd like to offer a challenge to anybody who's working with this population and who wants to make space available for Two-Spirit and Indigenous queer folk. And that's change the alphabet soup. Put Two-Spirit people first if you're on Turtle Island, because this is our territory, because we've always been here. And I often make that request, challenge, whatever you want to call it. One of the things that Jade did not mention about me is part of my role in community is as a disruptor. I shake things up. I'm reasonably good at it. And so I offer that challenge in that spirit. You know, when we think about Two-Spirit people, we think about Indigenous people in the skilled trades. Indigenous people have a long history of working in skilled trades. A part of that is as a result of colonization. Because, as I'm sure any of you who work in skilled trades, and many of us are aware, skilled trades are often held up as less skilled than trades or job opportunities that are rooted in having to have a university education, which is totally bogus, like most things that go along with colonization, because they're called skilled trades for a reason. It takes great skill to create the world that we're living in. That's what skilled tradespeople do. They keep our world going. That's what we're learning in this pandemic. You know, people often look down on folks who work in skilled trades, such as carpenters and plumbers and electricians, and we are learning just how important those roles are. And I think that that's a great thing. Indigenous people have a strong history. You know, the Ongwahongwe people, the Haudenosaunee people have a long history of working in steel work. The Iroquois people built New York City. Many of our people ended up in skilled trades, which were not until recently perceived as that skilled, as I said, being conceived of as less than other types of work, because we were considered to not be intelligent enough to do other types of work. And in fact, at one point in the Indian Act, we were precluded, if we got an education above high school, we would lose our status as Indigenous people in Canada officially. So we got pushed into those skilled trades because we were considered not bright enough. And the ironic thing is that our history prior to colonization is that many Indigenous communities were incredibly skilled in working in their environments all across the Americas. Some of the constructions were beyond anything that was ever created in the colonizers' lands. And we see it today. We see it in the way that Indigenous people have adapted and continue to adapt in creating things of beauty, in adapting things so that our communities can have a better life. That's something that we need to prioritize and to make those opportunities happen for Indigenous people. But we also have to recognize that Indigenous people face a lot of barriers, even in skilled trades, maybe especially in skilled trades. Accessing education, accessing opportunities for apprenticeship, and that again is linked to colonization. It is linked to systemic racism. It is linked to the misguided stereotypes and misbeliefs around who Indigenous people are and how capable we are. Because the myths and the tropes around the drunken Indians who are too lazy to work are still there. And if you go and you look at New York City, well, I wouldn't recommend it now, but if you go and look at New York City, Indigenous people built that city. Haudenosaunee, steel workers, built that city. So tell me again how lazy we are. We are creative and adaptive, and I have great respect for people who have those skills. I grew up with a man, my father, who is an American Indian, who is a construction battalion, U.S. Navy. He was the ultimate MacGyver. If he couldn't build it or fix it, it couldn't be done. Let's have more of that. I think my time is just about done. I think I had about 10 minutes. Am I right, Florence? So I will say, miigwech, thank you for letting me be here today, just to speak for a little bit. And I think I'll turn it over to the next speaker. Miigwech, nikanagana, all my relations.
Miigwech Sharp for your words. I'm always grateful to hear from you, and the fact that you are somebody who shakes it up is why I love to give you a platform and for you to speak. So next in our program is MLA Julie Green, who is the MLA for Yellowknife Centre. She holds a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Saskatchewan, a Master of Arts in History from the University of Calgary, and a Master of Arts in Journalism from the University of Western Ontario. She recently completed a certificate in fundraising management from Ryerson University, and she was the first elected to the 18th Assembly in 2015 and was the chair of caucus as well as the chair of special committee to increase the representation of women in the Legislative Assembly. Ms. Green was reelected to the 19th Northwest Territories Legislative Assembly, representing the constituency of Yellowknife Centre, and has lived in Yellowknife since 2000. Ms. Green also spent 16 years reporting for CBC, including on proposed Mackenzie gas project and the development of diamond mines in the territory. She was a contributor of the Far North Oil and Gas Review, which later became Up Here Business, working with representatives from the government of Northwest Territories, Indigenous governments, municipal governments, and the business sector. She helped create an anti-poverty strategy and action plan, building on the strengths of Northerners. She has also served as a volunteer on the boards of the United Way, Northwest Territories, Northwest Territory Community Services Corporation, Yellowknife Housing Authority, and the City of Yellowknife Social Issues Committee. We're very grateful to have Julie with us today because of all of the work that she has done before and her knowledge on the sector. So welcome, Julie. Oh, Julie, something is up with your audio currently. It is very quiet. If you are able to up your microphone, adjust your microphone volume. I cannot hear you very well, unfortunately. It was working earlier. If you go up to the top to your microphone and adjust your microphone volume.
I am not sure what else to do.
It is slightly better. It is still pretty crackly and pretty quiet, but if you speak maybe just closer to your computer, it might work out.
Okay, I will. I'll keep this brief. I am in Yellowknife territory on the traditional territory. Northwest Territories, the frontier place, and we have small populations. We're more than half the population.
So we're still unfortunately not hearing you really very well, and we're getting commentary in the chat to that regard, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, I think just wish you well and sign off.
Okay. Thank you so much, Julie. Apologies that this isn't working. Technology is a challenge. We could hear you earlier, so I don't know why we can't hear you very well now. Unless you have a pair of headphones lying around closely, we could try that. But okay. Well, apologies all. Thank you, Julie, for being with us. We're grateful to have you regardless, and maybe we'll have you back another time, and the technology will work out. We definitely will want to hear from you more in future. So at this point, we are going to move towards our panel. So I'm very grateful to introduce our proud partner at the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum, France, who is the Executive Director. She is a seasoned association management professional, passionate about facilitating collaboration and stakeholder engagement to create sustainable, positive change for Canadians. As the Executive Director of the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum, France is an advocate for better inclusion of underrepresented people in the skilled trades and for apprenticeship to be accepted as a viable and equitable educational pathway. France lives on a hobby farm outside of Ottawa and is an officer in the Canadian Army Reserves. And it's been such a pleasure working with her on this event. So France, take it away.
Hi, I'm hoping that the audio
your audio is also quiet.
Oh no. It is.
You may just have to keep it held to your mouth.
That I could turn up is turned up. Okay.
It's definitely better.
Is this okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Any closer and I'm eating the microphone. Okay. So oh no. Oh, that's too bad.
Yes. Excellent.
Is this better?
Oh, I had to turn up a little button volume.
Oh, I had to turn up a little button volume. There you go. Okay. Well, bonjour tout le monde. I'm really, really excited to be here. It's been a little while in the making with the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum and Pride at Work, but I'm excited that we're finally here today. And this is the beginning of a really important conversation for us as an organization. We want to keep engaging and keep sharing best practices about inclusion and helping out the apprenticeship community. So I know that Jade talked a little bit about what the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum is. We're a non-for-profit, as she said. But what we do is we've been around for 20 years, and we've been doing research around apprenticeship and the skilled trades. And what sort of sets us apart from other, I guess, research entities is that over the 20 years, we've been able to form a network of, you know, unions, employers, educators, apprentices, and everyone in the governments, both federal and provincial. We're actually able to get people around the table to have conversations, regardless of what the you know, individual interests are. We're able to use our network and then share the research outcomes and the best practices. So we're really hopeful that the conversations that we're going to have today is going to lead to more research, is going to lead to more sharing of best practices around inclusion in the workplace. So why specifically this is important to CAF and to the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum and the skilled trade community? Not only is it important to have social inclusion in where there's equitable access to these great jobs in the skilled trades, you know, it's the right thing to do, but from a business case too, if we talk about the labor market, you know, even pre-COVID and what's going to be post-COVID, you know, the construction industry, the automotive industry, there are gaps in skilled tradespeople. So we need to really get as many people interested in the skilled trades as possible, and through the apprenticeship system where there's the apprenticeship possibilities to complete the apprenticeship system and then become a journey person. So we are going to need about 160,000 journey people in the next 5 years to meet the labor demands in Canada. And we're already short in some of the trades like welding, like cook, and industrial millwrights. And part of the problem is that a lot of people don't know even about the possibilities. But then another research that we've recently done shows that 31% of the respondents that are journey people and apprentices say they have experienced or witnessed bullying in the workplace. So we have a lot of work to do. I am super excited to be moderating a really phenomenal panel. And what I'd like to do is have them each, you know, give a 1-minute spiel about who they are, and perhaps I'm causing chaos for the technical people because I was supposed to read them. But I'd rather have each of the panelists sort of say a little bit about themselves, and then we'll get to the questions. So is Suzanne available?
Yes.
I can.
Fantastic. Hi, my name is Suzanne Mills. I'm an associate professor and university scholar at McMaster University. I'm in the School of Labor Studies and cross-appointed in the School of Geography and Earth Sciences. I've done quite a bit of work on large resource development projects in the north, and I've looked at indigeneity and gender and inclusion in construction in relation to these large projects. That's my construction experience. More recently, I've been doing research on LGBTQ2 workers in both Sudbury and Windsor, and so that project is just finishing up right now, which is quite exciting, and I have a report that is hot off the press. We just went through the proofs yesterday, and I'll have a final version by Monday, so if anybody wants that report, let me know. And that project is looking at LGBTQ employment across a range of industries. And so it's harder to isolate construction because, as you'll see when I present my findings, very few people were in construction who participated in the survey, which is tied to the underrepresentation of 2S LGBTQ people in construction, but I will get to that later. So that's kind of my research area, issues to do with equity in work, and historically focused on the north and large construction projects or large projects and things like mining and forestry and hydrogen. Thank you.
Great, great. Phil, do you want to introduce yourself? Is Phil around?
Hi, Prad. Yeah, I'm here.
Hey,
Can you
Phil.
hear me okay? Excellent. Hi. This is dangerous, having panelists introduce themselves. I could tell you anything, but I will stick to the facts. I am Phil Gillies. I'm Executive Director of the Ontario Construction Consortium, which is a think tank lobby representing the unionized construction sector in Ontario. Going back historically, I served 2 terms in the Ontario legislature as MPP for the city of Brantford. And during some of that time, I served as Minister of Skills Development, Minister of Youth, and also as opposition labor critic. So I have a bit of a background in labor and training issues. Also, I am gay, and I was one of the group of MPPs way back in 1986 who campaigned to bring gay and lesbian rights to Ontario, which after a very fractious battle, we won that with the enshrinement under the Human Rights Code of what was then known as Bill 7 in 1986. More recently, I served as Secretary of Mayor John Tory's Social Housing Task Force here in the City of Toronto, and I'm involved in just about anything they'll let me touch. Great to be here, and thank you for having me.
And Jove.
Hi.
There you are.
Hi, so I'm Jove. I'm a queer, non-binary person of color. I live and work currently on the unceded territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people. I'm an immigrant and a settler. I used to be a filmmaker, scriptwriter, and moved halfway across the world to join the trades. And now I'm a furniture refinisher and woodworker.
So we're going to have, I think, what is going to be a great conversation today, and I feel really privileged to be having it with all of you. So I guess we'll get into some questions. Let's start with Suzanne. Can you share with us some of your research on the 2S LGBTQ plus people in employment, as well as the challenges you've seen in engaging that community in the trades?
Okay. I might start in the reverse order, if that's okay. So what I see is the key challenge of including 2S LGBTQ plus people in the trades is very similar, or very closely tied to the challenge of including women in the trades. In that construction has a culture of hegemonic masculinity, and what I mean by that is a type of masculinity that creates a hierarchy where more masculine is at the top and more feminine is at the bottom. So that's a problem not actually only for women and gender and sexual minorities, but it's also a problem for men. It leads men to do things to make themselves look tough and do things such as take health and safety risks that they wouldn't take otherwise. And so if you have that culture, anybody who deviates from a very masculine presentation will not be treated equally in the profession. And so if you have a gay man, or if you have any woman, whether they're a lesbian or straight or bisexual, if you have someone who's trans who doesn't pass completely, and that is what I found from my research as well. So my research on the trades historically have found that women face a lot of sexual harassment. None of this is new for most of you. I'm sure you're very aware of all these things. However, these things also occur for people who are gender and sexual minorities. So I think that these things are tied, and I think it's also another thing that's tied together is racism within the trades. And so a lot of people who are working in blue-collar industries in my research made connections between hearing someone say something about Trump or hearing someone say something about something racist and then saying, okay, I can't come out then. So these are all issues that are interconnected, and it's hard to separate them out sometimes, particularly when we talk about gender and sexual orientation. And so that's why I think there's a culture within the trades that permeates a kind of form of this hegemonic masculinity that creates a hierarchy. And this hierarchy exists amongst men as well, right? Everybody knows that some trades are at the top of the hierarchy and some are lower down, and people who are less skilled are lower in the hierarchy, and people who are working in the kitchen at a large construction site are the lowest in the hierarchy, and that's where you find most of the people who are racialized and who are women. So coming back to my research, I surveyed 667 people in both Sudbury and Windsor in the 2S LGBTQ communities in those cities, and we completed 50 interviews, and the results of that is just, we just finished a 40-plus page report with a lot of data from this research. Why do we care, right, about 2S LGBTQ people in construction? Well, one of the reasons we care is that we want people to have options about where they go to work. And 2S LGBTQ people have fewer options when they're in the labor market about thinking about where they want to work. Because they might perceive blue-collar industries as places where they're unable to work. These might be jobs that have more benefits or that have more job security. In our survey, 63.8% of people who we surveyed had no pension or health care. A very high percentage of our survey respondents were we labeled under 20,000 as a low-income category. And then we talked to people about their experience of looking for work, and 12% had left the job to find a more supportive environment. 19% had contemplated switching jobs because of the company's inclusion of LGBT or lack of inclusion of 2S LGBTQ people. This number jumps to 40% if we are looking just at transgender people. And so obviously people's identity is affecting their job choices and what types of jobs are available. And this is both because of the reality when they're in those jobs as well as the perceptions of the jobs. So we have both of those things going on. Another thing I think we should talk about is the different types of jobs there are in construction, because there are some jobs that are much better jobs than others. And we have some jobs that have higher pay than others, right? And often the jobs that have higher pay are those that tend to have the fewest people who are racialized or who fewest women. And we don't have statistics on this, but I also by extension guess that there'd be fewer people who were sexual or gender minorities. For example, residential construction seems to be an easier pathway for people to get into construction, but residential is also the sector of construction which is the lowest paid and has the least job security and tends to be the least unionized. So we have all of these different things going on. So this is why we care. More results from the research, if you want, I can go on. So there is an underrepresentation of 2S LGBTQ people in construction. For this, I wouldn't rely on my research, though, because I only have this sample of 666. But there's someone named Sean Wade at the University of Western, and he uses StatCan surveys, and there's one survey, the Canadian Community Health Survey. It's one of the only ones that actually asks questions about gender and sexual orientation, gender identity and sexual orientation, rather. And there is one place where he's able to look at representation across industries, and what we find is that, as we would expect, 2S LGBTQ people are underrepresented in construction, whereas 26.3% of heterosexual men in the survey were employed in trades, transport, equipment operations, and related occupations. That number dropped to 3.6% for gay men. It's a little bit, quite a bit higher for bisexual men, 19.5%. I'm guessing that they might not be out. 1.9% for heterosexual women, slightly higher for lesbians, 4.7%, and 3.2% for bisexual women. So you can see that each of those groups, less than 5%, is in construction relative to 26.3% of heterosexual men. So construction employs a huge part of our labor force, but people are underrepresented.
Thanks.
Yeah.
If I can just get Phil to join this particular theme, because talking about construction, you know, there is a bit of a image, I guess, issue in construction as not being an inclusive workplace, and the numbers, you know, obviously are telling the story. So what does inclusion look like in the construction industry?
Well, Frances, I think the traditional view of the construction work site as not being a very inclusionary place is not inaccurate. There's the stereotype, but was also the reality not that many years ago of the attractive woman walking by the construction site and the comments being made and the whistling and so on. We're not seeing that as much anymore, thank goodness, because enough women said over a sufficient period of time that they would not stand for it. So there's improvement there. We still got a long way to go on racial issues and also on LGBTQ issues. What does the equality look like? What does the inclusion look like? I think we have to look at a couple of phases of that. There's the path to the skilled trades, which is generally through getting an apprenticeship. An apprenticeship in most provinces can be gained either through courses at a community college plus on-the-job experience, or through the union and contractor-sponsored training centers. A lot of people aren't aware, in the province of Ontario alone, there are over 90, that's 90 training centers sponsored by the various unions and the various contractors associations. So we've got a challenge there in that the culture in each one of those institutions they well vary. Some of them, and I think most of them, strive towards equality and inclusion and creating a safe, welcoming atmosphere. Some maybe not so much. Where I think the bigger, and of course those who go through the community college system, well, you have, I mean, directly the protections afforded under the Human Rights Code, and also the generally accepting attitude that goes with being in an educational institution. I think the bigger challenge is on the job site. We're at a very critical point right now, and I'm sorry if I'm talking too much from a Toronto-centric point of view or an Ontario-centric point of view, but that's where I do most of my work. Only now are some of the unions and contractor associations looking at questions of racial equality, because there have been some really unfortunate incidents on job sites in the city of Toronto in the last couple of weeks. There's no point trying to sweep this under the carpet. I'm sure people have read or heard about it. On 5 job sites in Toronto in the last several weeks, mock nooses were found on job sites. This has led to a number of the unions and contractor associations springing into action. Only last week did the Carpenters Union publish this charter of regarding inclusive workplaces and communities. I could talk more a bit about that later, but we're at a critical point right now, and I think the call to action is most appropriately made right now.
And yes, we're going to, each of you are going to have the opportunity towards the end of our conversation to formulate a call to action. So why don't we move to Jove, and you know, the perception of tradespeople and whether or not the profession has been accepted in society as one, but then, you know, the acceptance of the 2S LGBTQ people on top of that within the skilled trades just amplifies. So I wonder if you could talk more about this perception that people have of tradespeople.
Oh, so I moved from a country that doesn't regard the trades as a viable career. Moving to Canada has been interesting because while there is still a difference, like, you know, we're still perceived as a blue-collar worker. And being blue-collar workers, we can't possibly understand bigger issues around 2S LGBTQ plus issues or racial issues. I think that it is a cop-out to say that we can't understand these issues. I think that there are many ways to educate oneself, but the perception around trades, especially as a queer person of color, is that the trades is dominated by cisgender heterosexual men, men specifically, and that doesn't create a safe place for people who are queer or to join them or feel comfortable. I think that there are barriers to entry, and it comes as simple as I am working for a very inclusive workplace. My boss is a queer woman, and she still gets my pronouns wrong every single day. And it's just something I have to deal with, which shouldn't be something.
Barriers, and there are a number of significant barriers to even entering the skilled trades from many of the underrepresented groups, and we need to do a better job within the skilled trade community to look at all of the sort of systemic barriers at each level of the learning of the trade. Because there are barriers within actually getting the technical education, but also in finding employment so you can get the hours. And things like people in the north having access to employment to do those hours, or a vehicle to get to the work sites. Like, there's so many systemic barriers within the apprenticeship and skilled trades system. We need to almost start at the beginning of the process and start addressing them one by one as we can. Phil, just back to you. We were having a conversation before this event, and you made a point to say that this particular event today is really timely. So why is that? Why do you think today is really timely?
I think it's particularly timely right now because these issues of inclusion have really risen to the fore in recent months and even in recent weeks. Things that have not been top of mind, I think, in the trades and in the training centers now are, and it's because of some rather unfortunate incidents that have occurred, as I mentioned before, in terms of perceived attacks on racial identity on job sites. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the bigger unions, the Carpenters Union, has just published a very good charter on inclusive workplaces and communities to speak to anti-Black and other forms of racism. I spoke to officials of the Carpenters Union just earlier this week, though, and pointed out that this charter does not speak to LGBTQ inclusion at all. And they are now looking at coming up with a charter that specifically addresses the issues that we're talking about today. There are some good things going on. The electrical workers, IBEW, have a very active LGBTQ committee that's doing some good work. I really think we're heading in the right direction, but this is a critical point right now for us to get the word out through a forum like today's and other methods, to get the word out to politicians, civil servants, educators, and people in the administration of trades, to get the word out that we need these issues addressed right now. This is the time to do it.
We need to go next with research. Like, I think we have a ton of opportunities to do more explicit research in on this subject. But how do we go from research to policy, I guess?
Well, one thing, and you touched on this earlier, Franz, is there's a very practical reason to lower the barriers to entering the skilled trades. And a big one is simply there is a huge shortage of skilled tradespeople in Canada. The shortage is bad enough that it is slowing down the rate of construction. And right now, coming out of the pandemic, we know that public infrastructure projects, construction of them, can be critical in restarting the economy. We're not going to be doing that as quickly as we could be because of the shortage of skilled tradespeople. And by that shortage, I saw statistics recently at a conference. The number of people in skilled trades who are within 10 years of retirement far outstrips the number of young people coming into the skilled trades. So putting aside issues of equality and inclusion and it being the right thing to do, there's this practical consideration. A young person today can go into an apprenticeship, come out, be making a good salary fairly quickly without the kind of debt hanging over their head that comes with doing a 4-year BA. So we need to get the word out on that. The Ontario government, Ministry of Labour, is doing a communications campaign into the high schools to get this message out. I'm not aware of actions being taken in other provinces, but I would hope and expect that they are taking it.
Promoting the skilled trades has been talked about for many, many years, and like you said, Ontario is putting something forward. The federal government had this great promotional campaign in their pre-election budget, so we'll see where that goes. But you know, you can invite someone for dinner, but if they come to the door and you don't open it, or you serve them liver, sorry for people who like liver, you know, that's another story. So I think that there's I would caution that we do a lot of prep work before we get too crazy about promoting the skills trade. And I was wondering, Suzanne, if because I see that you're writing a few points there, I want to give you the opportunity to say a few words about what you're writing there.
Yeah, I have quite a bit of research. One is that very few people are out at work across all industries. Only 36% of people who we surveyed were out to their boss. Approximately half of people were concealed their identity of their co-workers. It was much higher amongst blue-collar industries. However, I once again suspect that construction would be even higher. 64% of people were not out at work. I just want to read one quote that I have from one of the construction workers who we interviewed on this project. And the question was, do you think your choices about what field to work in and where to work were affected by how others perceive your sexual orientation? You mean where I choose to work has to do with my sexual orientation? No. Most of my choices are just what I've chosen to study. That's not to say my job doesn't affect my sexual orientation doesn't come into contact with my job at all. That's mostly my choice about whether to come out at different times. Like in the past, I might have come out in earlier jobs, but I don't think I'd come out, during the construction company. That's just kind of insane. So I think that that's the climate that there is in construction, right? Like, gay men wouldn't, like, why would that'd be crazy. That would be inviting discrimination.
Right. And Suzanne, maybe if I can just
point that's very important. Yeah, go
if
ahead.
I can just interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think it's just a really good place to just give Jove some space here to talk a little bit about her lived experience. And I know that, you know, we've discussed prior to this call, Jove, your experience as, you know, the trans part of the 2S LGBTQ+ community that's rather left out in your experience of important conversations. So I'd like to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, well, so I'm looking for a new job and I'm applying for jobs. And I had to have a call with somebody at the BC Women in the Trade Centre. And in this call, I had to ask, when in my application process do I come out as trans? Do I come out as trans? Because I don't know what the working experience is going to be like. I don't know what the shop is going to be like. I work in a shop, so it's not so much like a job site, which is worse and also better because, you know, I'll be seeing the same people every day. We're going to be in a very small space together. If I don't come out as being trans, if my workplace doesn't have gender-neutral bathrooms and I have to walk in through the women's, and I have to be misgendered, that affects my mental health. And
Joe, for a second, can I just interrupt? because I have just been advised that I may have myself misgendered you when I was talking about you. And I just want to sincerely, no,
okay.
I just want to sincerely apologize for doing that. And that's a lesson learned for me. So I hope you accept my apology.
And that I think that is a good learning point too. When people misgender somebody, whether by accident or, I mean, I hope it's not on purpose, it is good to catch yourself in that moment and be like, oh, I am so sorry, but let's, I'm so sorry, your pronouns are this, let's move on from this. Let's not put the emotional labor on the trans person, on the person that you've just misgendered to, coddle you and like, oh, no, it's fine, don't worry about it. Like that shouldn't be a thing that you expect trans people to do. Say sorry, these are your pronouns. I think that should be a thing that everybody should do. But I appreciate your apology. Going back to like being outing yourself at work, I don't know if I feel safe enough to out myself at work. I don't know if I feel safe enough or strong enough to stand up and be like, these are my pronouns. Please use them or don't use them at all. It's something that I think, and we've spoken about this prior, where the L and the G are constantly talked about. Phil mentioned that legislation for the L, G, and the B came up in 1986, but the trans part only came out in 2013. It's only a conversation that we're having now, and should have been a conversation that we've been having all along. Let's not forget that Pride was started by trans women of color. And let's not forget that that is an important part of our history as queer people.
Well said. So I wonder if at this point we can talk about a call to action. And so once we finish having this conversation, what needs to happen? Like in a perfect world, what would happen next? And Phil, maybe let's go to you first.
Okay, let me start by, I'm going to pivot back for a second to what Joe was just talking about, because I think it's very significant that the legislation we worked on and passed in Ontario in 1986 only spoke about gay and lesbian rights. There was no mention of trans rights at all. There was no visibility. There was no political will to address trans rights. And the trans rights bill, which eventually did pass the Ontario legislature, was not until late 2012, as I recall. And I saw on the chat list that my friend Susan Gapka, who was instrumental in bringing that about, is on this webcast. So there was a big gap in recognizing any sort of rights for trans people. Now, the positive side of that coin, the debate and the vote, the fight for gay and lesbian rights in 1986 was divisive. It was nasty. The legislature eventually voted like 60% to 40% in favor of it, and it was actually a bruising debate. If there's a silver lining, the trans rights bill in 2012 passed the Ontario legislature unanimously. So there has been progress to the extent that politicians reflect the views of people generally and their constituents. There certainly has been a great deal of progress in that 25-odd, 30-odd years. Now, what is the call to action? I think the call to action needs to go to the people doing the training, the people running the training centers, the people running the training programs, whether they are, as we spoke of earlier, the union and contractor-sponsored training centers, or whether it's the community colleges. That's call number one. Call to action number two has to go to the employers, because when the young people leave their apprenticeship and go out on the job sites, the quality of their experience whether it's positive and inclusive or whether it's not, is largely dependent on the kind of atmosphere, the kind of rules that are being laid down in the individual workplace by the employer. So we need to do a better job of engaging them, telling them a number of the things that we've talked about in the last hour, the practical reasons that they need to and should embrace a wide diaspora of people going into the trades, and also educating them on the rightness of them doing so.
What would you like to see happen? Short term and long term, maybe.
Sorry, I don't.
Yes.
Was it for me?
What would you like? What would you like to see happen? Like in short term and long term.
Okay, so we can start by having gender-neutral bathrooms in every job site, in every shop. Do away with the binary of men and women. When I filled in an intake form for the BC Women in Trades Centre, which in the naming is already very exclusive, but you know, I've had conversations with them about it. But in the intake form, they ask me what my pronouns are, and that is so powerful for a person who uses pronouns that are not common, to be asked what your pronouns are. That should be a thing at every the first time you meet anyone. It should be that question. You know, hi, my name is, these are my pronouns, what are yours? Normalizing that conversation, making it, you know, status quo, that's important. In the long term, in the short term, I think sensitivity training should also be a thing that everybody should go through, not just HR, not just the higher ups. It should be all the way from the bottom. Everybody should learn how to respect other people for their differences, whether it's their sexuality, their gender, their race. I think that the trades they don't focus on that enough.
Really, really good points and some tangible stuff to take away. Suzanne, do you want to? What needs to happen next?
I'm not sure I'm in a position to say what needs to happen, but I can talk about some things that could potentially be helpful. One of the challenges of the trades is that you have all these very small employers, right? And you have all this decentering, and that's also a challenge with Indigenous people enforcing impact benefit agreement things and such, because you might have an agreement with the owner might agree to project, or the design and build contractor might agree to something, and then you have all these subcontractors, and how do you make sure things are enforced? And then you might have other types of workplaces like residential where they're very small firms, and how would you ever access all of these? I think there's some things you can do when you do have a structure such as a large site. You can enforce things at the higher level, at the site level. You can have some of the things they've had for Indigenous workers could also potentially work for gender and sexual minority workers. You could have stronger policies of no harassment. I know everybody does have these policies, but I've seen different levels of enforcement in my experience. And sometimes, but what I have seen, which was interesting as a change over time, is that in some sites where a First Nation is involved at different levels in the organization and has a number of people in high positions on site, then I've seen racism challenged on a site and treated very, very seriously. But then on the same side, I've seen other forms of harassment and discrimination not treated seriously. So I think having people high up who aren't necessarily cisgendered white men, or who are people who can actually press this agenda, having an ombudsperson or a separate person that people can go to who's outside of the union and people's individual contractors, that's been helpful for Indigenous peoples. That could potentially be helpful for LGBTQ people. What else? Another thing that was helpful in the Indigenous case was having cohorts of people move through as apprentices, and so then you have people who have a natural built-in kind of team or support. But I think having, I was just working on a project on women in firefighting, And they were talking about having some structures outside of that as well. I agree with the training, but the training is very difficult because you have sometimes people are coming to construction sites for like 3 days. So potentially that's where you have to embed it within the unions as well, or within the employers. The unions would be a little bit easier to access. But can you include anti-discrimination training of at least some form as the same as health and safety training? That you have to have these certifications before getting on site. You can't have these, just like falling off a ladder or whatnot. I'm not sure, sorry, I'm not in construction obviously, but you could have something similar to that, right? That you have to have before you work on site. Those are my ideas. Yep, I just wanted to say one thing that was, I wrote in the chat, like a very surprising statistic is how these things intersect, because I was very surprised that people who were identified as Black in our survey faced a lot more discrimination on the basis of gender and sexual orientation. And people who were other racialized, we only had enough people, we had to cluster people, so we had other racialized Black and Indigenous, and the other racialized groups also had very high, so that, like, these things are tied together and they're connected, and so we need to address all of these forms of discrimination together. The bathroom issue is definitely an issue that I heard about. I also, someone mentioned in the chat that we should talk about how some people might have the choice to hide their identity and others do not, right? And so some people are inherently less safe. One woman who was on one of the sites that I worked on had transitioned on site and was getting a lot of harassment, and her employer, who formerly was good with her, then all of a sudden she transitioned and then talked about her being whiny and needy and whatnot. And then the union guy was quite good because he was talking to me about this issue, and he said, hey, look, I told the employer she was always like that. She was always complaining, a complaining employer. So why do you have a problem now just because she's a woman, you know? So anyway, so you can find, I would say not to paint a brush at the whole industry as being terrible. You can find good business managers. You can find some good people who are in the industry, and to support them. And then, I don't know, yeah, those are my
to do is you know, look at the things that are working and the programs that are in place, and then share them as best practices across the various sectors within the trades. I think at this point it's time for audience Q&A. We have some time if you have some burning questions, and I think you put them in the Q&A box for our panelists.
Yep, across at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that there's already a few questions for us, so please feel free
I can't see them. I can't see them in the Q&A.
Oh. Okay, I will send them to you in the chat.
Jade, do you have the ability to just read them?
I do.
Yeah, and I think Suzanne is seeing them as well.
Yeah.
One of the first ones was, can you speak to any examples of how employers and unions work together to progress inclusion in the workplace?
And who's this for?
It's not specified.
Phil, do you have some examples?
I mentioned it earlier. First of all, in the construction industry, for the most part, does not have a very confrontational relationship between management and labor. The construction unions generally have good relationships with the contractors associations. There are so many joint tables, joint fora, and so on that, and this is long established. So I think a good step forward, a good example, is this charter that the Carpenters Union has only recently tabled, Charter of Inclusive Workplaces and Communities. This is going to go out to all members. It's going to go out to all job sites, and it calls for all the right things. An end to discrimination, recognition of the dignity of every member, continuing to work with all partners, government, Indigenous people, civil society, and communities to develop policies, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is good. Where the real challenge is, and this came up just in the last few minutes, I think the major institutions that deal with the skilled trades have the right motivation and have the right policies and are heading in the right direction. I don't think our problem is with the carpenters union or the painters union or the electrical workers. I don't think it's with the systems contractors association or the other or the general contractors association. And I don't think it's with the community colleges either. I think we have to get this message down to the small private contracting companies that make up so many of the workers on any given work site. When you pass a big job site and you see the big sign saying it's an Ellis Don project, and you think, wow, this massive Canadian construction company is building that project, what you may not know is Ellis Don at any given time could have 15 or 20 sub-trades. And these are smaller independent companies who work under the auspices of the general contractor. That's where most of the employees are, is with the sub-trades. We've got to get the message to those small companies.
And one of the questions came from Nancy, I think, who asked about whether in the educational process or the trades instruction process, at any time as you go through apprenticeship and then become a journey person, if there is a standard inclusivity training that happens across the board. Jove, what was your experience?
Do you know what, in the overall, I know of specific examples of such policies and practices. As a general rule, whether it exists across the board, I frankly don't know.
And let's turn it over to Jove, maybe, you know, get some experiential, see.
Yeah, so I went through the foundations program at North Island College, and it was interesting. My class was 16 people, and there were 9 women and 5 men and me. I don't fall into that, but you know, and nowhere in any point of my training was there any talk about diversity. It was just kind of like, well, here it is. Do with it what you will. I had to speak up about being trans, about being non-binary. So, you know, my classmates would sometimes be like, oh, you go, girl. I'm like, I feel you, thank you, but also I don't identify with that gender marker. I know we are trying to be supportive of women in trades, and I'm very supportive of women in trades. I don't identify as a woman. And, you know, and this is a little bit of an offshoot, but I used to work at Home Depot, and when I spoke to HR about being like, I've been hearing a lot of trans-exclusionary rhetoric at work, I would like to come out and say that I use they and pronouns, and please, let's have this conversation. Immediately after that, I had a manager kind of speak within earshot of me, joking about how he might not identify as a man in a very mocking manner. And that's a big organization that actually does have some sort of educational component in regards to diversity. Things still that happens. So in the trades, I think that when it comes to just even starting your training, that should be your first thing you check off. It should be as integral as WHMIS and your occupational first aid. It should be a program that you have to go through, a certificate that you have to have.
Phil, this is a question directed at you. What is the role of government You know, you've been in government for a while, so what role does the government play going forward? Because apprenticeship is provincially legislated. Education is a provincial jurisdiction. So what is the role, do you think, of the federal government, first of all?
Well, federal government provides funding for a lot of the programs that are administered by the province. So they do have a role in setting rules and policies that could further the aims of inclusiveness and equality, the kinds of things that we're talking about. But the frontline delivery of a lot of the programs is provincial. So the provinces, I think the provinces have a responsibility. So in the example of Ontario, yes, Ontario has enshrined gay and lesbian rights, and then years later they enshrined trans rights. But are these rights being rigorously enforced by agencies of the Ontario government, specifically the Human Rights Commission, for example? It's one thing to have these things on the books. It's another thing to see that the aims of the legislation and the regulations are actually being furthered. So I would say that's a very key part of it for government. You're saying the right things. Mm-hmm. Now, what are you doing to make sure that they happen?
We're just going to wrap up the Q&A session, and I want to give the last question to Jove. What can colleges or technical training institutions do to attract 2S LGBTQ2 Q plus people in the skilled trades?
I can't. That's a tough question, because in my personal life, I am also trying to do outreach to POC and finding it very hard to do that. I think we can start at grassroots levels. T-flag, you know, at high schools, I'm sure high schools have LGBT committees, groups. These are places that you can go instead of being like, oh, I'm just going to shout this out to the void. Hey, we're inclusive. Please join us. Like, narrow your ask, narrow your audience. Ask specifically to trans LGBTQ2 plus folk. Reach out to them specifically instead of just being like, yeah, we're inclusive, but not show any tangible way in which you are inclusive. Because it's very easy to say, yeah, we're inclusive and we accept everyone, and then have that reality of the situation be very vastly different than what you're saying it is.
For sure. At this point, I just want to, we're going to turn it back over to Jade, but I just want to thank all of you. I mean, I think we could keep talking about this for a lot longer. You've all brought some very significant insights, and I hope that it's the beginning of conversation. And for me personally, I've learned a lot by chatting with all of you, and hope to be able to continue through the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum to create a platform for these discussions, and to continue getting beyond, you know, what has already been identified as barriers and need for change, like get beyond the rhetoric and get to actionable, tangible action items. So that's my hope out of all of this. But thank you for taking the time to chat with me. And on that, I will turn it over to Jade.
Thank you, France. It has been so wonderful having all of you here and talking with us today. Thank you so much to all of the panelists. Jove, thank you for your passion and courage in the work that you do in community in Victoria. Phil, for all that you've done historically, including, you know, passing landmark legislation that I have personally benefited from. Suzanne, for the research that you're doing that we're all anxiously excited and waiting for. Julie, who unfortunately had to drop out due to some technical issues, which these things happen, especially with varied Wi-Fi connections, but we're very grateful that she was able to join us anyway, and I posted in the chat her information, so please feel free to reach out to her. And for Sharp, who is always wonderful at stirring things up a little bit. And of course, Strauss, it has been such a pleasure working with you on this event. And as you said, this is the start. We'll do many, many more things as time goes on. So I wanted to share some resources with you. This PowerPoint is accessible to download, and there are links in there for you to access, including some resources that were put out by the Canadian Labour Congress, some research about how your sexual orientation, gender identity matters in construction, as well as a really wonderful article by the head of the BC Centre for Women in the Trades, which Jove mentioned, about celebrating Mother's Day and the new normal as a lesbian woman with kids. So please feel free to reach out to those links. And we also have events, 2 more of these events coming up, being Queering the Future of Work on July 22nd with the Conference Board of Canada, which will be in English. And then on August 12th, we'll be working with Youth Fusion on Generation Z, queer and trans on the job. So looking at the next generation. And so with that, I want to look at closing today and say thank you for all who have been with us today. This is such an important conversation. And you know, if it was one that had been happening years ago, maybe I wouldn't be here. Maybe I'd be working in the trades myself. So thank you so much to all of you today. You will receive a recording. And on that note, have a happy Pride and good rest of your summer. I hope you're staying safe, and so much love and appreciation from Predator Canada. Thank you.